My friends, today we have more comfy locations on the Nintendo 64 to explore. I hope these places were some that you enjoyed looking at in perhaps your younger days, and may evoke some form of comfort or nostalgia for you today. So relax, grab a warm beverage, pick up the controller, and play along with me as we explore some more comfy places on the Nintendo 64.
Here we go.
Here's a location that was commonly mentioned when talking about comfy places on the Nintendo 64. None other than Dolphin Park in Wave Race 64. And we can see just in the intro cutscene the dolphin speeding around, guiding us in a way as the lovely sea doers, or at least that's what we call them here, ride the waves and, just enjoy the ocean surf on a warm and sunny day. Now, interestingly, the machines we'll see here are actually called jet skis by Kawasaki. The generic name for them is actually a personal watercraft, and there are a few manufacturers. Kawasaki makes the jet ski, Bombardier, which we have mostly here in Canada, makes the Sea-Doos, and there's another brand, the famous Yamaha, who make not only pianos and motorcycles, but also make the Wave Runner. Now, in order to get into Dolphin Park and just hang out, we simply have to select a championship race and just click Warm Up. That's where you find the Warm Up option in this game. And it will show you Dolphin Park, and then entice you to simply follow the dolphin and maybe practice your stunts, practice your steering, and all of that good stuff. And it's a very simple little course, a couple of jumps, and it's laid out, in sort of this location that reminds me a bit of, say, a Bora Bora, with the huts placed on the water, right on the water in shallow water. And even though we have these very, paper 2D characters looking out on us, it still feels as though, maybe you're training or practicing for something big, or it gives a little bit of life to the environment. Certainly the motion of the waves do that as well. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it gives you little tips. Press up and down the control stick to lean the rider forward and back. And, gives you tips on how to do stunts and make various jumps and this sort of thing. But really just a very wonderful place, these great little water physics to, roll around, ride the waves on your Kawasaki jet ski, follow the dolphin, and we'll go take a jump in a little bit after we do a lap here. This sort of elephant rock is sort of the name for these sorts of structures in the water. And here we go. We did a backflip and landed it successfully. And, what more is there to life than that? Certainly when you're out on the ocean, out on the water, days like that, you're not thinking there's too much more to life than just that. The beautiful Dolphin Park sign is very, inviting as well. And, it's almost too bad you can't climb those ladders and walk around. It's what the game is sort of calling you to do. Obviously, you're riding on a jet ski. You can't just get off and go explore free mode. But that'd be pretty cool. It's the kind of thing that, as a young person playing the game, you might imagine, what if? That'd be pretty cool if I could do that. There we go. We just landed a very nice barrel roll, and all you do is you just can imagine, if you can't get out into the wild blue ocean or lake yourself, you can just imagine by playing this game what it would be like to do so. And in fact, it may even be more comfortable to do so from the comfort of your home and your controller. It is a fairly dangerous activity, we'll say, to be out in the water. It takes a lot of preparation. And look, you can fall right off your jet ski as we just did. But hey, I always love getting out on the water, especially when it's warmer time of summer and you can finally wade into the waves where the ice once stood. You get waves, beautifully. I love always, I'm a Great Lakes guy myself, so If you're a Great Lakes person as well, let me know in the comments. And, this course certainly is more oceanic and tropical than the Great Lakes, but some places do have beautiful white sand, on the shores of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, and there'd be many jet skiers and sea doers to be found in the heat of July and August throughout the summer. And so this wonderful Dolphin Park, well, there's no dolphins in the Great Lakes, but that's where Dolphin Park sort of takes me and reminds me when I'm riding the waves as only can be done in Wave Race 64.
To corner sharply, press down on the control stick while turning.
So here's one I've seen come up once or twice online in a comfy space discussion, and it is a course called Lefty's Mill from the game Excitebike 64. Now, I never had this game growing up, so it's a bit of a novel experience playing through it, and, like most driving games, you press A to accelerate and drive, and you can get a reasonable hang of it pretty quickly. And there's a couple of interesting places I would like to show here on the course that I find quite notable and comfy. And the first one is coming up here. Perhaps we can see what is indeed none other than some smoke billowing from a chimney. And look at this little spot here, some sort of cabin. There is a pickup truck underneath what appears to be a carport, and maybe some kind of water tower or even well for, water in this cabin. And as you're driving by in this course, you can only wonder, who might live in such a spot. We can see pretty quickly after that house that, this area appears to be the mill with some kind of work structure hanging from the ceiling, cranes of some sort transporting logs. Although the whole sort of unit is in a state of stasis currently. There's not much going on. Maybe things are put away for the weekend and the friendly workers in his cabin just hanging out having a fire. But it's kind of interesting to see these giant claws in this old wooden log, and presumably we'll see another part of the course in a second where that log might end up. So here's another cool spot as we see this river, and it's actually the logs floating down the river, creating the sort of bridge to get across. And at low speeds, it's very difficult. At high speeds, you can pretty seamlessly ride across. If we take a peek, we see what's clearly supposed to be a rushing river coming one way or another. And, really, there's not much beyond it. It does a pretty good illusion, unless you really look, that, the river kind of ends. There's not much to it. But it does sort of paint the picture overall in this course that, it is a mill, a logging mill, something that, say, the early settlers of Quebec would do, or I'm sure many parts of the Appalachians in America. And, cutting down the trees to build, the early states of infrastructure in these countries. Certainly hard work, driving the logs down the river and whatnot. And it's just a very cute and comfy course where you can sort of imagine, a very forested region, kind of a perfect place to do some dirt biking way off in the woods. And yet you come across this path, a bit of a tricky obstacle because, who would want to end up in the river on your motorbike, on your dirt bike? Not me. Let's see what it looks like. You really go right in there, and then the game resets you as one would expect. It reminds me a little bit of Indiana Jones, some of the rivers and water features in that game. As we sort of get towards the far end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle, I believe this game was 2000 or maybe 99. And, we see more advanced sort of textures coming up, and they can really evoke a sense of, that water really looks like it rushes. That would be an intense place to, have to pick the logs out of, like the old Courrier de Bois here in northern Quebec. And, of course, then we come here, and maybe that answers the question of who would live in such a place. And it might be one of those workers. And you can imagine the sort of comfy life they might live in that simple cabin away from the hustle and bustle of the city. and drive their pickup truck to town for their supplies when needed. Where do they go into town? These days, maybe all they'll have in town is a Dollar General and not much else. But, in the 90s, maybe there was a more soulful location. But there you go, the beautiful and serene Lefty's Mill with the wonderful cabin built just outside the mill on the edge of the forest. And we can just wonder exactly what it might be to live there as we buzz by on our bikes. Now here's a heck of a spot for you all. None other than the Waterfall Rapids, or the location of the Beaver Race in Majora's Mask. Now, most of the time you come here, you will probably race the beavers. And I think all in all, you get, a bottle and a heart piece. And usually when you come here, you'll probably do one of those things. It's rare to come back here and not race the beavers, to do that sort of thing. But you are totally allowed to do so. You can follow the race course regardless. And it's one of those things where the first time you do it, it almost feels like you're in a place you're not supposed to be, because there's really no other point to be here. And yet, here we are. And it's just kind of crazy that, this game, it's very well documented the game was built in like an extreme rush to get out for the holiday season one year. They reused all the elements from Ocarina of Time, or a lot of them. The beavers were certainly some new characters they added. That's why so many of the characters are the same. And yet, they had all the time to add in these areas. This particular beaver area where there's nothing going on. It's an entire area that's only purpose is to give you a bottle and a heart piece and race a couple of beavers. It's very crazy when you really think about all the effort that's gone into making this location. And, traditionally the end of the race, you get into this beaver dam and that's it. And there's a cutscene on the end of the dam. But you can actually get in here if we go all the way around and just hang out inside the beaver dam that the two beaver brothers have presumably built. And it just feels like such an unexpected place to go. What's going on here? Why are we here? And it certainly looks like it was made by non-humans. It's beaver dammy, nesty, rat's nesty almost. Although it is relatively tidy, but it's certainly not, a man-made structure. And it kind of feels wrong. Like, where are we? Would you know from a screenshot if I just showed you this screenshot where we were in The Legend of Zelda on N64? Even looking here, well, as Mr. Zora, possibly. But, as Link, would you really know exactly where we were if you were so shown this screenshot? And there's nothing to it. But in Majora's Mask, and certainly a lot of Zelda games, there's always this theme where it's hard to find these sort of peaceful areas with nothing going on. Where you can kind of just relax and there's no enemies out to get you. But this whole area is one of those places. There's not a single enemy to be found. That'd be really annoying. You go and try to swim in the Great Bay or the Zora Cape, and there's all these, likes and other fish enemies always trying to harm you. But in this location, you're perfectly safe. And especially as Zora Link, you can just stay underwater forever and swim around and run around and roam this area, and it's really quite a comfortable spot. You can imagine a beautiful temperate day to swim around, and even though the moon is there glaring ominously at us, it wouldn't be a Zelda unless you put off saving the world to explore and go on side quests and have a fun time. Under here, even though there's sort of, some sort of plants on the top of the surface, we can still easily dive up and down. The fish here are friendly, quite big fish, but they're all friendly. And the environment is just serene, if not sublime even. Swimming through these alleys and We can make our way all the way back to where those beavers are just spurring around, always looking for a race. They do get kind of fed up and scared of you after you beat them a few times, as you naturally do. But just quite a delightful spot, a safe spot to come and swim and put the worries of Hyrule aside, or Termina aside, at least for a little while. Here's what I see often come up: the character select cabin in 1080 snowboarding. I mean, just look at this shot here of the rider Kensuke Kimachi sitting by the fire. There's obviously something always wonderful about sitting beside a fire. We have Dion Blaster playing some pool. We have the one and only Rob Haywood sitting by the bar, maybe getting a hot chocolate or something like that after a long day on the slopes. Akari Hayami is chilling on the loft with Ricky Winterborn, and it really just paints a nice picture of what it might be like to chill out and hang out, especially if you were a top, pro snowboarder and you were welcome to hang out in such a lodge and kind of just choose your own adventure. Where would you hang out? The bar, the pool table, the fireplace, the loft. And really, it's one of the most iconic spots, maybe in the entire game, certainly in the snowboarding Nintendo 64 games. So there's a quick shout out to the character select cabin in 1080 snowboarding. One day, my friends, I will learn Jet Force Gemini and beat the game to such a point to get to the so-called water ruins, which I've heard are the comfiest area on the entire N64. I won't spoil it in this video. I'm only here in the first level. One day, my friends, I will play through and get there just to include it in a video like this. My friends, let's do a full exploration of Holiday Island here in Pilotwings 64. Now here on this beautiful, beautiful Serene Island, a great level design that the developers made back in the day with all sorts of structures and features to explore. Now, the mission we're on is one of the first missions in the game, and we're simply told to pop this balloon up here above this castle and then go land our rocket belt vehicle, a sort of jetpack, in that red target. And that's great and dandy, but there's so much else to check out that let's just go do that instead. One of the first places I find very cool to check out is this spot. It's sort of the namesake of the island. It appears to be a modern holiday hotel where one could stay and hang out and go on vacation here on Holiday Island. We have lots of umbrellas that are set out on the beach. You would wake up and go claim your chair and umbrella down first thing in the morning. Probably a catamaran and a couple of boats you could maybe take out on the bay and explore a wonderful day. And even a swimming pool here for those who prefer to stay, closer to home, we'll say, or closer to their room and safety, and swim only in that kind of pool rather than swimming in the vast wide ocean. And you kind of wonder about these little tiki huts on the side. Are they maybe a sort of special resort location one could stay at while vacationing here on Holiday Island, or the premium suite or something of that? I love how there's even this little set of stairs one can climb to this overlook. You could almost imagine if the game was, say, more developed, and it's very impressive for what it is in 1996, would this be a place where, maybe some chairs and tables are put out to dine, looking over the ocean? Certainly that might be the case in a wonderful high-end resort. If we come out here, we can see actually, the parking lots for the resort, the sort of roundabout when you just arrive and drop off all of your goods and your luggage, and even a nice little golf course that seems connected to the resort. And I love the golf course because you can almost kind of walk through it and sort of figure out where each hole would be, and almost the par of each holes, pars 3s or 4s or 5. Looks to be about a 9-hole course. And, you can sort of almost imagine sort of the early prototypes of then Mario Golf. This game was a launch title for the N64 well before Mario Golf came out. And maybe the fact they include a course here is one of many sort of experiments into figuring out how they could lay out a golf course on this console. If we care up the beach here, we get more towards the sort of interesting castle area. And there's even a smaller house, kind of gets more fantastical up here. A smaller house with the chimney bellowing smoke always makes it feel a little bit alive. And you can almost wonder if maybe a groundskeeper lives here to maintain the castle or the golf course, or maybe both. And the castle sort of lacks an explanation exactly what's going on here. Who lived here, why. The levels are presented with very little context. We do see, a paved parking lot with even lights to sort of, shine over there if you were leaving at night, for example. A nice little balcony here. We'll go stop for a second. But, why there's a castle here in Holiday Island is a question that, you can only speculate. We'll never really know. Even there's sort of a lookout over here, a platform, maybe a little bit dangerous, You can get right out to the edge and look out. Look out over the beautiful ocean. Over here we have a nice lighthouse and some other cabins, some other inhabited dwellings, we'll say. This one looks great for a lighthouse keeper to stay in, right at the base of the lighthouse, as they tend to their daily task of making sure the lighthouse is lit for any vessels in the ocean. And again, almost a little community, maybe a family and friends all living up here to do their thing. But here we get to the grand centerpiece of Holiday Island. And we're welcomed in by a pair of gates on a road with a massive parking lot. And this is supposedly a theme park for the island, very clearly. You can imagine you pull through the gates, then you pass through these gates and pay your admission. And lo and behold, what do you have? We have a beautiful Ferris wheel. Looks to be some sort of concession stands, a couple of circus tents, and even, down in the middle, a beautiful carousel. Carousel I always love. It's been a long time since I've been to an amusement park myself. But I always love stopping on the carousel midway through the day when you're just getting a little bit tired and need a break from all the thrills and chills of the more exhilarating rides. Kind of calm down your day by sitting on the carousel for a bit. This Ferris wheel, very rudimentary three-dimensional rendering, but it does the job and it's pretty cool. One can imagine what it would be like to sit on this Ferris wheel with ocean views. Now we can see it's not doing a great job of rendering me landing on it. I was hoping to land inside one of the boxes and go for a spin. Unfortunately, I just sort of land on the edge of it and it rotates around and through me. But hey, for 1996, it's not so bad. The circus tents, 2 beautiful tents. You can't really get inside of them. We'd bump into this closed wall here. But you can imagine the sorts of shows that might take place in that circus. Maybe we've all been to a sort of theme park and seen some kind of show. Maybe it was good, maybe not. Maybe our parents want to go and we would rather be on the rides and that kind of thing. Now we come over to this area and sort of seems like the town. Maybe the local town that supports the amusement park where the workers would live. The guests probably stay in that hotel that we looked at earlier. But this area seems to be like a little village where, the inhabitants of the town would live. You can almost walk through their streets and imagine their day-to-day business, maybe on their days off when they're not working at the amusement park. And then the most interesting thing, well, one of them, is this little spot here with a little mill. It has its own little parking lot, and a beautiful watermill coming down. I saw a great meme the other day about how field trips are wasted on the youth. Who wouldn't want a day off in adulthood to go check out the old watermill and learn about the early settlers and pioneers of a location? But when you're in grade 5 and you're 10 years old, it's not too interesting. And so I can imagine this sort of mill might have been the first settlement here on Holiday Island. And then everything else kind of came after that. This was the first person to sort of settle and figure out a way to make it work here on the island. And then from there, the village was able to be built, and then the amusement park and the castle, and eventually a huge runway to land massive airports and see a bustling tourist industry. We're out of fuel here, so let's crash and then carry on. Now, one thing that I personally didn't know about Holiday Island is that every time you play it, it's daytime. There's 4 maps in this game. They're all amazing maps. I'm going to say it every single time, but someone needs to make a Mario 64 mod using the Pilotwings maps. That just has to happen. As we cruise over the beautiful airport here, the air traffic control tower, and it's quite a plane that we see landing here. Almost not quite a 747, but maybe an Embraer or sort of a mid-size jet. But one thing that I didn't know about this map, as we see these beautiful fountains and rivers, is that all the other maps you'll get daytime, you'll get clouds, you'll get dusk, sunset, or nighttime in your various missions throughout the game. But Holiday Island is always played in the daytime. However, if we enter this tunnel, and we're careful about it, we can actually get a point where, look, you can almost crash, it's difficult to pull off, the game transforms into night. And so we can take a beautiful cruise over Holiday Island and see now the town down here is lit up. The inhabitants are home after a long day of work at the amusement park, chilling and maybe watching, who knows, playoff hockey or cricket or whatever it may be. The amusement park is here. It looks kind of shut down for the night. The wheel, there you go, it is spinning after all, and here the lighthouse we see is illuminated, shining as a beacon if we were to fly out into the ocean and make sure that we know the places here are not to run aground. The castle's lit up very well, and it really adds quite a little hidden element to it all. I wonder, of the people who played Pilotwings, and apparently it sold around 1 million copies, how many of them ever knew that you could turn Holiday Island into nighttime? How many of them ever explored the island like this? I'm sure many of them did that. But in terms of making it night, how well was that secret known? And as we go over here, you might have noticed on the left, this star under this arch. Now, if we go collect the star, this would be a great spot for an actual star if someone ever does get around to making that Super Mario ROM hack here. But if we collect the star, we are transformed into none other than the one and only Birdman. And this is a feature on every course where you can just soar around the course. I find that the rocket belt is better for actually exploring because you can kind of land and take off again, and it's more maneuverable. But in terms of just soaring around, nothing beats Birdman and the unbelievable soothing music that plays when you are transformed into the Birdman form. So there were some more comfy locations on the Nintendo 64. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, leave your comments and memories about these places or any other places you'd like me to check out in the comments. I always love reading them all. A huge thanks to you for watching, and a super thanks to the patrons for supporting over on Patreon. You can check that out if you would like to support my work even more yourself. So thank you all very much. Stay true, my friends, and I will see you in the next stream, video, or fireside.